376 DC. Imagine the largest river in Europe. Now imagine every person you have ever known standing on its northern bank looking south. That is what happened at the Danube in the autumn of 376. Hundreds of thousands of Visigoths, men, women, children, the elderly, entire villages, entire clans, arrived at the Roman frontier in a single mass and asked to cross. Not to raid, not to conquer, to escape. Because behind them, coming from the eastern steppes at a speed that no one had anticipated and no one could explain, were the Huns. And the Huns were something that the Visigoths, who were themselves not a gentle people, who had been fighting Rome on and off for a century, had decided they could not face. The Emperor Valens said yes. He let them cross. What happened next destroyed the Roman world. Not immediately. Not in a single catastrophic moment. It destroyed it the way a crack destroys a wall, slowly, invisibly, until the morning when the whole thing comes down and everyone acts surprised. One of the children who crossed that river would grow up to sack Rome. His name was Alaric. He spent his entire life trying to be part of the empire that refused to accept him. He fought their wars, buried their enemies, built their roads with his people's blood. And every time he asked for what he had earned, they said no. What he did next changed the Western world permanently. Subscribe, like the video, and let's start from the beginning. The Visigoths did not cross the Danube as conquerors. They crossed as refugees. This is not a minor distinction. The entire narrative of what follows, the wars, the sieges, the sack of Rome, only makes sense if you understand what these people were when they arrived. They were terrified. They had watched the Huns annihilate the Ostrogoths to their east. They had watched clan after clan absorb the attack and disappear. The Huns fought on horseback with composite bows at ranges that Gothic infantry couldn't answer, and they moved faster than any steppe force anyone in the region had ever seen. The Visigoths made a decision. They went to Rome. Not because they loved Rome. Not because they wanted to become Roman. Because the Danube was the one barrier that the Huns had not yet crossed, and on the other side of it was the most powerful military force in the Western world, and being inside that force seemed safer than being outside it. Emperor Valens saw an opportunity. The empire needed men. The legions had been bleeding for decades, campaigns in Persia, internal revolts, the constant pressure of frontier maintenance across thousands of miles of border. Here, presenting themselves at the river crossing, was an entire nation of Germanic warriors asking for permission to become Roman subjects. He let them in. The Roman officials responsible for processing the crossing saw a different opportunity. They saw hundreds of thousands of desperate people with no leverage and no options, and they acted accordingly. The food that was supposed to be distributed to the Gothic settlers was sold back to them at extortionate prices. Gothic children were taken as slaves in exchange for dog meat. The officials enriched themselves systematically and reported to Constantinople that the resettlement was proceeding normally. It was not proceeding normally. By 377, the Visigoths were starving inside Roman territory, watching their children disappear into slavery, and the rage that had been building since the Danube crossing had found a target that wasn't the Huns. It had found Rome. August 9, 378. The Battle of Adrianople is one of those moments that historians mark as a before and after. A line in time on one side of which the world is one thing and on the other side of which it is something else entirely. Emperor Valens had marched his army to deal with the Gothic rebellion personally. His generals advised him to wait for reinforcements from the Western Emperor Gratian, who was 2 weeks away. Valens didn't wait. He had intelligence, bad intelligence as it turned out, that the Gothic force numbered around 10,000 men. He had roughly 15,000. The math seemed favorable. The math was wrong. The Gothic cavalry, which Roman scouts had failed to locate, returned to the battlefield in the middle of the engagement. They hit the Roman flanks simultaneously. The Roman formation, which depended on maintaining its shape, on the integrity of the line, collapsed inward. Men who couldn't move couldn't fight. Men who couldn't fight died where they stood. 2/3 of the Roman Eastern Army died at Adrianople. Among them, Emperor Valens himself. His body was never recovered. The Romans who wrote about it afterwards struggled to find a comparison. They reached back 6 centuries to Cannae, where Hannibal had destroyed a Roman army in a single afternoon. Adrianople was worse than Cannae. And in the Gothic camp that night, among the warriors who had watched the most powerful military force in the world break apart in a single afternoon, was a boy. He was somewhere between 8 and 10 years old enough to understand what he had seen, old enough to remember it. He would remember it for the rest of his life. The settlement that followed Adrianople was not a Roman victory dressed as a negotiation. It was a Gothic victory dressed as a settlement. Emperor Theodosius, who inherited the catastrophe after Valens died on the battlefield, was a practical man. He could not expel the Goths. He could not destroy them. He did what Romans had always done when military force wasn't available. He incorporated them. The Visigoths were settled in the Balkans as foederati, federated allies, technically subjects of the empire, obligated to provide military service in exchange for land and a degree of autonomy. They kept their own laws, their own leaders, their own language. They were inside Rome without being Roman. Alaric grew up in this world. The world of the foederati, people who existed in the space between belonging and exclusion, who fought Rome's wars and built Rome's infrastructure and were paid in Roman coin and buried their dead in Roman ground, but who were never quite allowed to forget that they were not, in the end, Roman. He was intelligent. He learned Latin. He learned the Roman military system from the inside, the logistics, the command structure, the tactical doctrine that had built and maintained the largest empire the Western world had ever seen. He rose through the ranks of the Gothic military units that served under Roman command. He became, by his mid-20s, a figure of enough significance that his name appears in Roman sources, which for a Goth in this period was not a small thing. The Romans who wrote about him noted his ambition. They noted his intelligence. They noted that he wanted something. What he wanted was a title. Not land. Not money. Not independence. A title. Magister militum. Master of soldiers, the supreme commander of a Roman regional army. The position that would make him, officially and permanently, part of the structure he had grown up inside. Not a federate. Not an ally. A Roman general. It seemed like a reasonable ambition for a man who had spent his entire life fighting for Rome. Rome did not see it that way. 394 DC. The Battle of the Frigidus River was a civil war dressed as a religious war dressed as a military campaign. The Western Empire had a usurper on the throne, a general named Eugenius, backed by the old pagan aristocracy of Rome, who had taken power in the west while Theodosius controlled the east. Theodosius marched west to reclaim the unified empire. Alaric marched with him, commanding the Gothic federate contingent. What happened at the Frigidus was not what Alaric had expected. The battle lasted 2 days. On the first day, Theodosius sent the Gothic federates forward as the initial assault force. They attacked the usurper's fortified position in a narrow alpine pass. The attack failed. 10,000 Goths died on the first day alone, cut down in a position that any competent commander would have recognized as suicidal before ordering the attack. On the second day, Theodosius committed his Roman legions. A wind came up from the east, the Bora, a violent alpine gust that blew directly into the faces of Eugenius's men, disrupting their formations, blinding their archers and handing Theodosius the victory. He called it divine intervention. His Christian chroniclers agreed enthusiastically. Alaric looked at the battlefield differently. He had watched 10,000 of his people die so that the Roman legions could be fresh for the second day. He had watched them used as expendable shock troops while Roman units were held in reserve. He had watched Theodosius win a battle that the Gothic dead had made possible, and then watched him thank his god for the wind. He rode back east with his surviving men. Theodosius died the following year, in 395, leaving the empire to his 2 sons, Arcadius in the east, Honorius in the west. Both were children. Both were useless. The men who actually ran the empire were their advisors and generals. And Alaric, riding back through the Balkans with an army that had just bled itself dry for an emperor who was already dead, made a decision. He was done waiting to be given what he had earned. He was going to take it. The Visigoths elected Alaric king in 395 or 396. The sources disagree on the exact year, which matters less than what the election meant. It meant that the man who had spent his career trying to rise within the Roman system had been chosen by his own people to lead them outside it. The Goths who elected him were not making a sentimental choice. They were making a strategic one. Alaric was the most capable military commander they had. He spoke Latin. He understood Rome from the inside. He knew where the weak points were, which frontiers were undermanned, which commanders were incompetent, which supply lines could be cut. If anyone could extract from the empire what the Goths were owed, land, status, recognition, the title that kept being dangled and withdrawn, it was him. He accepted the election. And then he made his first demand. He wanted the Magister Militum title that Theodosius had never given him. He wanted formal command of the Roman military forces in Illyricum, the Balkan region where his people were settled. He wanted the arrangement that had been implicitly promised since Adrianople finally made explicit and permanent. Constantinople said no. Alaric began to move south. He was not yet trying to destroy Rome. That is the thing that the later narrative, the sack, the legend, the centuries of historiography, tends to obscure. In 395, in 396, even in 397, Alaric was not the destroyer of civilization. He was a man who had spent his life inside a system that kept refusing to acknowledge him, and he had finally found the leverage to make it listen. The leverage was his army. 40,000 warriors who had nothing to lose and a king who knew exactly which doors in the Roman world were unlocked. He walked south through Thrace, through Macedonia, through Thessaly. The cities closed their gates. The countryside burned. The Roman army in the east watched from a distance and did not engage, because the Eastern court had decided, in its political calculation, that Alaric was more useful as a destabilizing force in the west than as a defeated enemy in the east. He reached Greece. And Greece, which had not seen an invader in centuries, opened before him like a wound. Alaric stood at the gates of Athens in 396. Athens, the city that had produced Socrates and Pericles and the Parthenon. The city that every educated Roman, and Alaric was, in his way, educated, knew as the cradle of the civilization they had inherited. The city sent him gifts, wine, food, gold, a negotiation dressed as hospitality. He accepted. He did not sack Athens. Nobody has ever fully explained why. Some sources say he was moved by the city's history. Some say the bribes were sufficient. Some say he saw the goddess Athena on the walls in full armor and turned away. What happened next, in Corinth, in Argos, in the Peloponnese, was not restrained. But Athens stood. And somewhere in the calculation Alaric made at those gates, between the city that represented everything Rome claimed to be and the army at his back that represented everything Rome had refused to become, was the contradiction that would drive him for the next 14 years. He didn't want to burn it down. He wanted to be let in.